All right, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms, talking with the philosopher and evil socialist and podcaster and author Ben Burgis about what's kind of become my hobby horse lately, which is talking about misinformation and the demonization of academic and philosophical schools of thought like postmodernism, critical race theory, critical theory, and the Frankfurt School that a lot of public intellectuals in the intellectual dark web are loosely associated with it, like James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson and others, and Dave Rubin, of course, too, and others are spreading about those sorts of academic fields of thought. So so thanks for talking with me, man. And to start off with, I guess what are some of the things that you think they get the most wrong, and what do you think is what do you think are some of the main problems with them going around like spreading this misinformation and demonizing these academic fields of thought?
Yeah, thank you for that and for having me on. So I guess the way to start this maybe would be by talking about the person who, more than anybody, maybe is my kind of entry point into thinking about this, which would be Jordan Peterson in 2018. Is sort of felt like Jordan Peterson was starting to peak, and I was just seeing his stuff everywhere. Now, it's not like he's gone anywhere. If you go and look at Amazon, there are like listings of the top 20, books, bought or read in the last week. Like he's always on there, right? He's still incredibly popular, but I think that he had a kind of currency then, when people were just kind of learning about him, and I think people who were really into him had a kind of evangelical fervor about it, back then. They'd bring him up a lot, and right. And so I would, I ended up, this is before I did it, was doing any of the stuff I'm doing now, but I get into a lot of arguments with friends, somebody I went to school with, a member or two of my extended family, a person or two that I like drank with at expat bars when I lived in Korea, and so.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know you lived in Korea.
Yeah, 3 years. But
okay.
But yeah, like for all these people from all these different sort of backgrounds, would kind of pop up as like, oh yeah, this is really interesting. I've been hearing about this guy, and I would, like that would be the day because I would do the XKCD, someone on the internet is wrong thing, that I have to like spend the day arguing with them on Facebook, and so I did a lot of this, and Jordan Peterson, and then I kind of ended up doing it in more in other forums, later on. In fact, that was kind of how I ended up writing my first book, because Doug Lane, who's the editor at Zero Books, had he'd actually booked Peterson to come on the Zero Books podcast, and he'd accepted it was going to happen. And then maybe Peterson himself, to be fair, probably somebody who works for him, but one or the other realized that, finally Googled, Doug or Zero, and realized it wasn't going to be a friendly conversation, and canceled the appearance. And then very shortly after that, Dr. Peterson himself was on the Joe Rogan show, and Joe asked in that sort of, charmingly earnest, slightly stoned way of his, why none of these equality of outcome Marxists you're always talking about, why why do you never, do debates with them? And Jordan said, well, none of them want to talk to me. And Doug got so pissed off about that he organized this, or, he reached out to some people in the New Civilization Project in Idaho to, and sort of jointly organize this conference called Jordan Peterson, a conference in lieu of a debate, or responding to Jordan Peterson, a conference in lieu of a debate. And since I was thinking about the guy all the time, because I was getting into all these arguments, and I knew Doug from other stuff from a long time ago, I submitted an abstract, for a paper for this conference, and then I kind of told him that I'd done that. He was like, "Oh, I'll look out for that. Hey, actually, I was wondering if you wanted to write a book for us," and that was kind of the beginning of everything. So even though Jordan Peterson isn't mentioned in that book, he's, he in a way he's kind of the genesis of it. And Jordan Peterson's big thesis about a lot of this stuff, roughly speaking, I mean, he writes about different things. I'm sure, I know there are people who have found him helpful in contexts where they're trying to pull their lives together because of one problem or another, so I want to give him his due. But the stuff you find in 12 Rules for Life, I'm less familiar with. I know he has 12 more now, but
yeah. I personally
24 Rules for Life. So,
yeah. 24, soon more to come.
Yeah, I would imagine, right, that we're going to get at least 36 by the time it's over. So, I'm less familiar with rules number 13 through 24, but 1 through 12 are mostly fine. I don't think it's that different from what you'd find in any self-help book for the most part. There are a couple of exceptions. There's one of the rules is don't let your children do anything that would make you just lose respect.
Yeah. That's one of the rules that I didn't like in that book. I think it was don't let your children do anything that makes you not like them, which is, I mean, obviously
good luck with that, man.
One of the, and obviously the worst iteration of that rule could be, oh, you're gay? Well, you're not allowed to be gay. Get out of my house.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. So, I mean, that would be the worst, most extreme version. And it's very, and the, way he puts it is certainly open to that. But even in milder iterations, it's still, one, not exactly realistic, given, just human psychology, the way people are growing up and, as teenagers, and interactions that people have with their parents and rebelling against their parents and all that. And two, it just seems unhelpfully authoritarian, right? So I think that's one of the places where his, where the right-wing politics are kind of bleeding into the self-help. And the other one, of course, is, the one that Zizek pushed back on, when, Peterson did finally decide to debate one of these equality.
That was a great debate.
Which is, don't put your house in perfect order before you try to change the world. And Zizek had a great line about this, which was, I really like it because it doesn't presuppose anything particular, that would be in contention. It's definitely speaking to Peterson in his own terms. It's okay, when you give this advice to a North Korean, right? That you can't about this in your society until you've just put your personal life in perfect order. And what if problems with your society are part of the reason why your life isn't in perfect order? So
I think personal responsibility wouldn't help people that much in North Korea.
yeah, exactly. That's not their problem. But although I have heard that in North Korea that weirdly enough, the people in North Korea can grow marijuana pretty openly, and they don't actually care much about it, because it's it's considered to have acceptable, medical uses, which is just one of those funny things that's the most otherwise one of the most repressive societies in the world, is
that's interesting.
Yeah, that and abortion are the two ways that North Korea is more permissive than South Korea. Every other way, it's the other way around. But also, I think that eating dogs is still legal in North Korea. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's at least as of when I looked that up several years ago, that was still allowed there. So those are the three ways. But yeah, look, I think that those two are starting to get into the your larger worldview is like going into the self-help. The other 10 are fine, right? It's like perfectly okay self-help advice. I don't think that different from what you'd find anywhere else, but it's fine. And if it helps people, great. But there's also always been this other side of Jordan Peterson that's been mixed up with that in some of the ways we've been talking about, but also some other ways that he has, and in fact, in some ways is the reason that anybody knows who this guy is, right? Because he first came to prominence through his opposition to, C16 in Canada, which basically adds gender identity to the pre-existing, human rights statute there, which he thinks would mean that, like, if he misgendered a student in one of his classes, he called them by a pronoun they didn't want to be called by, that he would be found to be like violating the law. I will say at this point, it's been on the books for a few years and nobody's been like arrested or even fined for anything like that.
So he hasn't been sent to the gulag for that yet.
Not yet. And I don't know. I actually made this point a couple of years ago to a crowd that included a lot of people who are more sympathetic to Jordan Peterson than I am, and the big pushback was, well, just because it hasn't happened yet, doesn't mean that it won't. It's like, okay, maybe, but every passing year that gets a little bit less convincing. But I think that, I think the primary purpose of the law was to stop people from like discriminating against trans people and like housing and employment and like stuff that's maybe a little bit more important than what, some high-strung psychology professor, at the University of Toronto, whether he, speaks to people in a respectful way or not, which is, I think is relatively low priority as far as those issues go. But that's the reason that people knew who he was in the United States, or really probably most of Canada in the first place. And then like the runaway success, 12 Rules for Life kind of built on top of that. And even in 12 Rules for Life, and this really gets to the heart of what you're asking about, he uses these phrases a few times in that book about postmodern Marxism or postmodern neo-Marxism.
Postmodern neo-Marxism, that totally bullshit term that he invented. That makes no sense.
He talks, like, even in his self-help book, he repeatedly uses this phrase. And in fact, even in his self-help book, one of the very first things at the beginning of the book is he talks about lobsters and how like, was it like dominant struggles among lobsters where they'll go.
Yeah.
There's like some specific kind of lobster. I keep thinking rock lobster because of the B-52 song, but that's not it, right? Some other kind of lobster where they have like a small minority of the lobsters control all the, most of the good territory, mates or whatever. And he says some sardonic things. And like, this is like the introduction or maybe chapter 1, about, needless to say, not because of capitalism, maybe like that's, so like he's got the political slant. Even like, there.
Yeah. Bro, lobsters have hierarchies. That means they're natural and good.
Yeah, right. And I've always thought that the best response to this came from the YouTuber Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints. She did this video back in 2018, just called Jordan Peterson, I think, where she made the point that the structure of this argument, which Now, who Peterson's target is really unclear. We'll talk about that in a second. But the structure of the kind of argument he's making, that whoever these people are who are his political enemies, who he's attacking, these postmodern neo-Marxists, SJW, whatever's, right? Those people are, want to get rid of all hierarchy, but hierarchy is not just a sort of constructed social thing. Has this deep basis in our evolutionary genetics. That's what the lobsters are supposed to show you, because, my God, the lobsters branched off in the evolutionary family tree from the ancestors of humans, 50 gazillion years ago. So if even they have these hierarchical predispositions, then it's totally absurd to say that humans could get rid of them. And if humans couldn't get rid of them, we'll try to make them get rid of them, with I don't know, Stalinism or C16 or blue-haired college kids yelling at him, or whatever, whatever the communist revolution, whatever, like this sort of cluster of enemies that he sees faced against him.
Yeah.
That,
and then sorry to interrupt, but I mean, one of the many criticisms of that is the naturalistic fallacy, right? It's natural, that means it's good. Like that's what eugenicists have used to justify eugenics.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wonder about the eugenics application, but certainly it's natural, therefore it's good, right? Is a very bad argument for him. I used to, I actually think probably now this would be redundant because there's been some cultural progress on this, but back in 2009, something like that, right? I was still a graduate student at the University of Miami, and I was also teaching some adjunct classes at Miami-Dade College, just community college there. If you've seen Scarface, his sister was going there. Wow. She mentioned that, briefly in the there's one-line dialogue there. But it used to be that I teach ethics classes there, and I think once or twice I would say, for the last day, we'll no reading, just give me a topic, right? Whatever the most people want to do, we'll do on that last day. And we'll just kind of talk it through in class, and people would want to do things related to gay rights, or whether some people coming from various sorts of Latin American Catholic backgrounds, is homosexuality morally wrong, and at least once I remember we did that on the last day, and I asked them why, and they trot out this thing about nature, which, okay, one, get put two unfixed male dogs together. That's the assumption is wrong, right? But two, if the idea that, or also actually even outside of that context, students would sometimes bring it up, when we read Peter Singer's arguments for vegetarianism, because they'd say, meat is natural, and whatever you think about any of these conclusions, right? It's a terrible argument, because look, if you're going to say whether or not something exists in the non-human natural world, and if that's not what natural means, I'm not quite sure what it does mean, says something about its morality, then look, here are things that are all over the place in the natural world: rape, cannibalism, cannibalism of your own children, for lots of kinds of fish, which is a good evolutionary strategy. The ones that swim faster, are going to survive. And conversely, here are some things that absolutely don't exist in nature. Libraries, hospitals, etc. Right? So it's very strange to think that there's any kind of reason there'd be a correlation between these things. But I think that the more, I think somebody trying to defend Peterson here, or, maybe the most coherent version of his argument would be something like this, that, because it's so deeply embedded in our nature, trying to get rid of it is going to be unsuccessful. And not only is it going to be unsuccessful, but because you're trying to force people to do things that don't, fit with their nature, you're going to end up basically at the gulag. I think that's like the real argument, right? You're going to end up with this crazy authoritarian setup because because that's the only way to try to, completely get rid of all inequality, because they just keep popping up. So, if you have to have this like hyper control of, society to try to enforce this. But the point that Natalie made in her video in 2018 is, hold up, this is an argument that could have been used at any time in history against any attempt to get rid of any pre-existing hierarchy. Because after all, nobody actually says, sometimes I'll grant you some, there are like some leftists who are enthusiastic and haven't thought about it very much, who will maybe use the phrase, I want to get rid of all hierarchies. But I think on like Socratic interrogation, like very few of them actually think that, right? Like nobody, almost nobody. I shouldn't say nobody. It's like the Cicero line, right? There's no position so absurd it hasn't been advocated by some philosopher, but almost nobody, even anarchists, right? Even most anarchists don't think that literally everything in life should be non-hierarchical, that, you can't have winners in basketball tournaments, and, parents can't like have any authority over toddlers, like, etc. Right? Like nobody actually thinks that. So the issue is always about particular hierarchies. And so just Natalie's point real quick is just, okay, so you could have the antebellum Jordan Peterson using this argument to, argue against abolitionism. You could have the 18th century French aristocrat, Jordan Peterson, using this to argue against, 18th century, French republicanism. Like it's so vague that it applies equally well, or I would say equally badly, to all of these. And I guess last thing I'd say before throwing back is just so that's the sort of core of the argument. And the people who Peterson thinks are his enemies are postmodern neo-Marxists, by which he means postmodernists, Marxists, and roughly like blue-haired college kids who'd like get upset at him about social justice things. And in his mind, those are all three are the same thing. And it seems to me that what we're seeing at the 2021 update of this from James Lindsay is basically the same sort of master thesis, except that now instead of Marxists equals postmodernists equals blue-haired college kids, it's Marxists equals critical race theory equals the Frankfurt School equals the CDC equals blue-haired college kids.
Yeah, basically, like they're lumping more and more things together. I wonder how long it's going to be before they just say all left-wing ideology and all continental philosophy in general. And one of the things too that's interesting that I've been learning about more lately is like actually reading more left-wing thinkers, like actually reading some Marx and paying more attention to like left-wing YouTubers like you and Vosh and people like that. And one of the big things that I've learned lately that relates to some of the I think oversimplified takes on Marxism that people are making in the comments section here that I think it would be good to address is the difference between like how they want and I would, like I told you before, I wouldn't call myself a Marxist or a socialist.
Sure.
But I think that there are some merits to these, a lot of merit to these ideas, and the way that they're often presented, particularly by right wingers or by people like Peterson or James Lindsay, are really, they're like lumping, they're basically by Marxism and Stalinism and Marxism and communism and socialism. All of those things apparently mean like Stalinism and Maoism, like the most authoritarian government control of everything, rather than like the other way of approaching this I've heard described, which is more of like democratic worker control of society, like not a government control, like people vote on everything somewhat. So I think that relates to a lot of these comments that people are making here about communism and shit like that I think would be...
So one comment that I saw was a quote from Marx about the abolition of private property. And I think that to even have a discussion about that, like you have to track what is being talked about there, because, and this is not me like trying to stretch to like come up with, like I'm, as somebody who in 2021 who likes Marx, I want to like, find some creative way to interpret him that doesn't sound this bad. Like literally read the Communist Manifesto. He and Engels are explicit about this distinction I'm about to make. It's unambiguous in the text. And, in the thing that even Jordan Peterson read, right? There's the Communist Manifesto. The 2019 debate with Slavoj Zizek, he admitted that he just reread the Communist Manifesto in preparation for the first time since he was 18, which makes you wonder, because he spent like the last 3 years going around the world denouncing, whatever he takes Marxism to be. And, if he hadn't, and, you could read the Communist Manifesto in an afternoon. So if he hadn't read that since he was 18, I don't think he was pouring through all 3 volumes of Capital. But
if he's a serious intellectual, he should have read like Capital Volume 1. That's
he should have. I mean, if he was going to like make such a big point of opposing Marxism in public, then I mean that's like, which especially is funny because like something that I remember from back when people argued about Jordan Peterson more in 2018, 2019 was that the sort of cliched answer to objecting to something that Peterson says in one video or one place was no. To understand that you have to read all 12 Rules for Life and all of Maps of Meaning, and you have to watch these lectures that he gave about the Bible, and you have to, et cetera, et cetera. It just kind of kept going. But it's like, I don't know. I don't think read more than just the Communist Manifesto is unreasonable. But even if you just read the Communist Manifesto, they're explicit there about this distinction between what they mean by private property and what they mean by personal property, which is, I agree, a confusing way to talk. So we could just rephrase it, right? We could say private property in the means of production and private property in, personal context, right? And so the point is not that they're opposed to people owning, their own computers or whatever the sort of stock example, people joking about this, right? Their own toothbrushes. The point is about people owning their own factories, for example. Now, you can have all sorts of reasons why you might think that there should be, personal, private, ownership of factories, and we could have that argument. But I think we need to be clear about what we're arguing about, and I also think that when it comes to what a non-capitalist arrangement might be like, when it comes to like there's a Peter Kropotkin, there's a Russian socialist in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. He has a book called Factories, Fields, and Workshops. So that's like that's like pretty good as like a sort of initial gloss on the sorts of things we're talking about, right? Just that phrase, right? Factories, fields, and workshops. So who should own those, right? How should they be run? And there are a few different.
That's a good quote from the debate here. Where are these Marxists?
Yeah. Like what was one of the most striking moments in the debate that Zizek. I'm not going to try to do a Slovenian accent, but he said,
where are these postmodern neo-Marxists?
Yeah, it was kind of Zizek is Dracula, but I like it. So in that, I mean, and Jordan Peterson famously couldn't actually name any names. He couldn't actually cite anybody by name. He just kind of said, well, read like the Heterodox Academy or whatever. Like, he sort of referenced groups that say things like he says about universities. But it's like, I don't know, man. Like, you spent so much time talking about this, and like you really can't come up with a single like specific first name, last name individual to peg this critique on. Maybe this isn't as big a problem as you think it is. you know, like if we're arguing about, you know, bad police killings, and I was going on and on about, you know, how awful it is that, you know, police can get away with killing people, and then you ask me, okay, so like, who are some people who were killed by the cops? And I can't think of one, right? You know, like, I'm probably not the most credible messenger for, you know, for this concern about police violence. So yeah, I think that Marx himself is pretty vague about what he thinks an arrangement other than, you know, private property in the means of production, the factories, fields, and workshops, all that stuff would look like. And I think, you know, he says some things that are suggestive, like there's, you know, if you read like his inaugural address to the First International, he talks about you know, those few worker co-ops that existed at that time, and said that these were like really valuable social experiments because they proved that you could have modern industrial production without dividing society into a class of workers or a class of hands. You know, class of masters and class of hands. That was the phrase that he uses there. He says a few things in other contexts that might also fill in the picture. I mean, I think that oftentimes when we talk about this, we run two slightly different things together, which are, could you have a way of organizing society so that you didn't have a class of people who own businesses and another class of people who realistically in most cases had you know, didn't have a good plausible choice other than to sort of submit to the authority of the first group of people? Like, that's one question.
Yeah.
And then another question is, can we sort of rationally plan an economy in a way that doesn't rely on what are often seen as the sort of chaotic or socially destructive forces of like markets? And I think that it's actually, you know, in classical Marxism, oftentimes these aren't really differentiated enough, but these are actually really different questions. And I think in particular, when you you know, when you start to think about some of what was wrong with the, you know, societies like the Soviet Union, that oftentimes, of course, there are lots of Marxists who criticize those societies like from their inception, you know, from like, you know, Russian Revolution is in November 1917, you know, October on the old Russian calendar, you know, they got rid of after the revolution. So that's why it's called the October Revolution. But in 1918, Rosa Luxemburg wrote this pamphlet called Critique of the Russian Revolution, where she saw a lot of the authoritarian writing on the wall, and she's very critical of it, right? Really important early 20th century Marxist. You have a continuous tradition since then of, you know, what we could think of as a little anachronistically the Luxemburg case, but broadly anti-Stalinist Marxists. And I think in that tradition, people tend to say, well, what was wrong with the Soviet Union and other societies like that is that they weren't democratic, that you know, decisions were really being made by this sort of small coterie of state officials, rather than the sort of great mass of, you know, workers and peasants. And fair enough, I think that's right? I mean, that critique is correct, but I don't think it's sufficient, because I don't think it really captures everything that went wrong with those societies. And I don't think we have to, you know, I don't think we have to caricature it as like a kind of 1950s, you know, grainy black and white film reel conception that it's like every day in the Soviet Union for 70 years was nothing but bread lines and gulags. You know, that these are complex societies. They had impressive accomplishments as well as dramatic shortcomings, and we could, you know, I think look at a nuanced way about the good and the bad. But I think going forward, say, well, these are experiments that failed, and they failed for a reason. And it's not, you know, you can't just blame everything on, you know, the CIA and blah, 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 right? You know, that there are internal reasons why this society has had huge problems. And one of them certainly is the lack of democracy. That is really important, but I don't think it's necessarily the whole deal, because if you kind of imagine a version of the Soviet Union where everything else was the same, but they had a free press and multi-party elections, and whatever party won the election maybe got to appoint the head of the central planning office, Gosplan, that year, right? Like they form a majority in parliament, and they form a government, and they get to appoint the head of Gosplan. Okay, would that version of the Soviet Union have been way better? Yeah, certainly. It would have been better in many ways. I think the sort of worst horrors of the worst part of the Soviet experience would have been avoided. I don't think the Ukrainian famine would have happened if Stalin had to worry about getting reelected. But I don't know that the day-to-day frustrations of Soviet consumers who just kind of had to hope that the products they wanted, would be in the store, because there was really no feedback loop to kind of coordinate what was produced at that level of detail, with what people wanted. I don't know that necessarily would have been that much better in this hypothetical version of the Soviet Union, which is why I think we need to separate does society need to be divided into a class of workers and a class of capitalists question from the can we completely get rid of Marcus question, right? So I think that my answer to the first question is, yeah, right, I'm a socialist. I do think that's possible. My answer to the second question is probably not. That if you look at the history of the 20th century, there are good reasons to be, to be pessimistic about that. And, maybe in the 23rd century when it's artificial intelligence has come along so much and blah, 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 right? Then like there will be ways that we can completely plan things out, without running into these problems. But I think for the moment, I think if I could just kind of will away all of the political obstacles, but not the economic and logistical ones, I think that the best we could have would be a form of socialism, where, sure, some things are definitely taken out of the market. In fact, I think that, under capitalism even, there are lots of places, if you look at the Nordic countries or even the UK, there are whole industries that I think have been very successfully taken outside of the market. Healthcare is an obvious one.
I was thinking of that one actually too, because you mentioned Canada earlier, and I live in Canada, so we have socialized healthcare here, and it's pretty fucking awesome. Like I don't know anyone who's gone into debt from having to go to the hospital or something. My mom has a lot of health issues, and she has to go to the hospital relatively often, and that's never cost anything other than you have to pay for the ambulance. So I can't even imagine how much that would cost if we lived in the US.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And there's a reason why, conservative politicians in Canada never run on the platform of reprivatizing, the Medicare system in Canada, because once people have it, they like it. And I think that there are probably other things, we could, maybe go through a list of I think that there are other things that could fruitfully be taken out of the market entirely. I think, I think when you start thinking about, education and energy and also some of what are sometimes thought of as the commanding heights of the economy, big banks, stuff like that, I think you could be publicly run and it would be good. Now, you might still need, for all those reasons, if you want to avoid the Soviet grocery store problem, you might still need a market sector, but I think you can at least have a market sector that's made up of worker-owned firms, that, like Mondragon in Spain, where, there are, there's still, selling things, in like a larger market in society. But, the firm, that management, at least at high levels, is elected by the workers themselves, and you have what's called an operating agreement, which is roughly the equivalent of a union contract. Like, it sort of specifies a bunch of things about how things will be run for the duration until the next operating agreement has to be voted on, except that there's no separate boss to negotiate with. It's unilateral. That and I think that you could have public banks, kind of as the way of seeding, worker cooperatives, and I think there is a potential scenario. Obviously, like I said, we're sort of willing away all the political obstacles. I think anything like this as the actual dominant economic mode would be, we can't even get healthcare in the United States, right? I'm talking about, like, what I'd love is, if I just, like, sort of magic genie, how do you want to reorganize society? I think we're a long way away, but ideally, right, that's certainly what I would advocate. I think that, which means that I think that there are a lot of really important things that Marx got right, but also I think, Marx, probably did assume there's some indications of this, and, some of his write-ins that, markets and kind of rule by capitalists would go away at once. And I think, that given some of the hard-won economic lessons of the 20th century, probably not, so I that's why, this actually just came up, and maybe this gets us back to the stuff that you originally wanted to talk about, because 2 weeks ago, something like that. I don't know. Time's a flat circle. Sometime in the past, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was in Arizona debating Charlie Kirk, and
yeah, I heard about that. That's not out yet, right?
No, it's actually I think he's airing it on his. So, because the deal was, we did it at the Turning Points USA studio in Phoenix, and the deal we made with them was that they get it first. So it's going to air, the main part of it, like the first hour of it, is going to air as an episode of his new show, Debate Night with Charlie Kirk. And then there's a kind of post-game part that I think is going to be put on his podcast, but when they give us the video, it'll be the whole thing. And then, so I think that's actually coming out on their channel tomorrow, and then we get it to run on GTA on Monday. So at long last, we can do that. But when that comes out, one of the things you'll see is there's this, at the beginning of the sort of post-game part, Charlie says, well, what do you think about Marx? I said, well, I like Marx. And I wasn't quite sure where he was going with it. I was like, well, but look, I think, man's writing at the late 19th century. It'd be pretty amazing if he didn't get anything wrong. Like that's not how intellectual progress works. So I think you have to take it a la carte, and look at the arguments individually. But I think he got a lot of really important stuff right. I think his theory of history is basically right. And then Charlie jumps on that and says, and this is, I think, the James Lindsay influence. Charlie says, well, that's basically, the Hegel theory of history, right? And he even mentions like the phenomenology of spirit or something.
And he pretends to know what Hegel's dialectic is, right?
Yeah. I'm just going to take a stand here and say, I don't think this is too mean that Charlie Kirk has not read the phenomenology of spirit, but I'm morally certain of that fact, actually. But in any case, and then I said, well, no, it's not basically the same. And then I think he sort of thought that he'd like caught me in like, some kind of evasion, that like he really had the goods on this, because what he's learned from James Lindsay is that Hegel is like the source of all evil, in the world.
Oh yeah. Hegel is so woke, bro. His dialectic was all about wokeness. Didn't you know that?
And so he wants to like jump on this. He can prove this connection. He says, yeah, well, but Marx was literally a young Hegelian. And I said, yeah, but then he rejected Hegel because he was a materialist, and so he's and then Charlie kind of didn't know what to do with that, and we sort of moved on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to comment on a few things there. Like you mentioned Kropotkin, and I've been learning about like some of the classical anarchists like Kropotkin and Bakunin, and people like the anarchists and anarcho-capitalists like Dave Smith and Michael Malice are mentioning. And that's another interesting thing I've been noticing, that a lot of these classical anarchists that particularly Michael Malice often mentions, they were like super like lefty in some ways too. Like they were not just anti-government, they were also anti-capitalist, which I think is really interesting because it's more consistent than anarcho-capitalism, which is like I don't understand why they're doing that. And then like that's, and like the term like postmodern neo-marxism in terms of Jordan Peterson, for example, like postmodernists and Marxists have been criticizing each other since both of these terms have been invented. Like some of the best criticisms of postmodernism come from Marxists and vice versa. And then like this isn't like you mentioned this earlier too about James Lindsay. Like James Lindsay, at least he could come up with some names of people who he thinks are post.
Oh, hold on, I lost you. You still there?
For a sec.
Okay. Yeah, you froze up, but the last thing I heard you say. Hold on, can you hear me?
Oh, am I back there now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Am I back there now?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So the last thing I heard you say was that at least James Lindsay can name people, which I think is right. You know, I think that Lindsay has. I mean, I think I've been pretty, upfront about this, and like to the point that it's slightly awkward because, like, I know people who know James Lindsay and like him a lot better than I do, but I think I've been pretty upfront about thinking that he's a lunatic. But he is at least somebody who has done a lot more reading than Jordan Peterson. I think you have to give him that. And he at least has like whatever sort of chart that he's got up like on his wall, like the a beautiful mind, where he's got all the things that are connected to each other, and the like circled. And,
this is wokeness at the top, and it has all of these threads that become a web eventually.
At least he's got a lot of names in his thread, which means that he's less lazy about it than Jordan Peterson, who just has vague impressions and rants about them. So you got to give him credit for that much. But it is super weird. Like, yeah.
He gets it wrong. Like he's like one of the things he does, like, I don't understand why he started bringing critical theory in and associating that with critical race theory. Like critical race theorists, they don't talk about class unless they're into intersectionality. And then they talk about that too. But most of them, like the way it started out with Kimberly Crenshaw, who he talks about all the time, she doesn't talk about class. And like the critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer and Marcuse, they're like criticizing capitalism and fascism and Nazis and stuff. They're not talking about race. And then he's connecting this stuff to postmodernism. Like people like Foucault and Derrida, they didn't really talk about class and they didn't really talk about race. They were like criticizing institutions of the Enlightenment, but they weren't like these schools of thought. They're not really even connected. Like,
no. Well, I mean, if anything, they're connected in the sense that a lot of postmodernism, like when people, when some of these guys you're mentioning, talk about, sort of distrust of grand narratives about history. Not only is Marxist theory of history exactly such a grand narrative, but it's like the primary one that some of them had in mind, right? That when they made these criticisms, and actual Marxists at the in France at the time, like did not like these guys whatsoever. Like we're very we're very critical of them. I mean, I think that the thing that's kind of true is that if you watch like videos of like Foucault at a certain stage in like the late 60s, early 70s, when there was a lot of sort of new left radicalism in the air, like he kind of mimicked a lot of that, right? But I think if you listen closely, like his analysis of it, is very, very not Marxist, right? I think
one of Foucault's quotes that I like to always mention when people associate Foucault in particular with Marxism is a direct quote from his book called A History of Sexuality, Volume 1, which is, "Government is the only fatal form of power." I don't think that's a Marxist right there.
No, I don't think so either. And I think that, in fact, So I mean, in that ContraPoints video I mentioned earlier, she talks about, she quotes like Sartre, who actually was a Marxist. Who, by the way, it's kind of funny that all these sort of strands of continental philosophy that are associated with Marxism by these cranks that like existentialism is never thrown in. That's the one you could actually make the best case based on its leading figures. But like Sartre actually was a Marxist, was like over the top critical of Foucault. Like he said. Like Foucault's ideas are like the last barricade to like defend capitalism, which is maybe hyperbolic and silly, but I mean like it tells you something about how little these people liked each other, and yeah, when you start talking about critical theory and critical race theory and Marxism, I guess I just want to start making a lot of distinctions there too, because it is true that if you're talking about like the Frankfurt School, which is like along with Hegel is what Lindsay and his ilk are obsessed with, which at least I've got to say makes slightly more sense than the postmodernism thing, because the Frankfurt School intellectuals actually do come out of a Marxist tradition. But I would say that even though these guys are all started out as Marxists and some of them, are still more or less ended up as Marxists, it's very much not Marxism classic, right? I think there are really important differences there. And then, as you say, when you talk about critical race theory, that almost sounds like you're just like, okay, I understand if you didn't know anything about either of these two things, those two, well, they both have critical theory in them, that they critical race theory must be the version of critical theory that's about race, but really no, right? I mean, like this, as you said, Kimberly Crenshaw, this started out as legal theory, which by the way is one thing that, as far as I know, Marcuse, Horkheimer, Adorno, all those guys, if any of them gave a shit about legal theory, I'm not familiar, with, maybe high level theorizing about the state and laws and stuff, but like legal theory in the sense that somebody like Kimberly Crenshaw cared about, it's certainly news to me. But in, like what, critical race theory is, okay, A, very different from critical theory, and B, even more different from like relatively conventional forms of Marxism for reason you kind of hinted at there. And I think that, what I would, I think if you read the people I would at least regard as the Marxists who have the most perceptive things to say about race, people like Adolf and Tori Reed, Cedric Johnson, the Field Sisters. I would say that these are people who, I don't know that any of them have, how much any of them have specifically written about this. And I would imagine since the James Lindsay, Chris Rufo stuff has been going on, they probably don't want to touch it. But like, their ideas are really sharply different, right, from what critical race theorists are going to say. And there's
Yeah, I've heard Adolf Reed be really critical of critical race theory.
Yeah, no, for sure, right? So like the the Marxist criticism, so I mean, I guess like critical race theory, I think starts from a correct insight, which is that having formal legal racial equality doesn't actually eliminate any of the injustices that disproportionately afflict non-white people. It doesn't actually result in, it doesn't result in like racial disparities and all the things that are racial disparities in going away. None of that, right? That they obviously formal legal equality is great. It's a long step in the right direction, but if you want a society, and I'm being really careful about how I put this because I'm trying to be neutral between a couple different places you could go from here, but like if you want a society where where people who are the descendants of slaves aren't, don't tend to be at a disadvantage relative to people who were not the descendants of slaves. That's what you want. That formal legal equality is not going to get you all the way there, and that's just true. I mean, that I don't see any reasonable way of denying that. I mean, like unless you're going to go into like Charles Murray territory and say that it's just like we have perfect equality of opportunity. It's just it's just genetic. That's the reason that you continue to get disparities, or you do the like, I guess slightly nicer conservative thing, which is where you say, well, it's just because of bad culture, that's the reason, like people don't have enough of a work ethic or something. But like unless you're gonna go one of those ways, then yeah, absolutely. You have to say that formal legal equality between the races is not in itself sufficient to end the sort of larger injustices that were perhaps created by the system of formal, explicit racial apartheid that we had until, like really almost until my parents went to college, right? I mean, like that's pretty recent. So, okay. So I think that's a correct starting insight. But then I think the issue after that is, okay, but what is the solution? And in particular, so both what's our analysis of why that's not sufficient, and then what's our solution to the problem, and then also maybe if we want to add on a third thing, what would we count to solving the problem, right? What would we consider to be achieving a just society? And I think on all three of those questions, and I'm not saying there aren't people with different combinations of views who sort of mix and match, from elements of both of these, but like, at least broadly speaking, I think the classical Marxist answers to those questions and the critical race theory answers to all three of those questions are going to be very different.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think like in terms of like systemic issues with non-white people, I think like there are different schools of thought that I think all have merit, and you can combine to try to see like like you were saying about how these problems are multifactorial. Like I think race is part of it, and class is part of it, and culture is part of it to varying degrees depending on what specifically we're talking about. And I think that like in terms of the one thing that I found interesting in reading some of the critical race theorists is that when they use the term racism and systemic racism, it doesn't mean what I thought it did and what a lot of people assume it means. It doesn't necessarily inherently mean that you have direct, conscious, malicious intent towards Black people as a white person. It's more of kind of like a sociological description, like with the way our society is organized, white people sometimes unintentionally behave in racist ways towards black people, sometimes through not even through any fault of their own, like without any meaning to, even though they consciously see black people as equal to white people or something like that.
So I guess to sort of get at the criticism that people like Adolf Reed would be in, like the kind of first place to start pushing into that is what do you mean by race? Which sounds like kind of a stupid question, maybe. But really, what do you mean by race? Because presumably, if this is a discussion where Charles Murray isn't in this discussion, we're talking about people who agree that racism is bad and that et cetera, right? Like presumably we all agree like biologic it's a nonsense category. It's completely arbitrary. There's difference.
Well, some critical race theorists themselves, like there are disagreements about different types of critical race theorists about this, but that's why the camp of critical race theorists that I think is most interesting, and like the one I think is least interesting are the most radical ones and like most radical fringe ones. But I think the most interesting ones are the ones who basically just talk about how race is a social construct too. And even Thomas Sowell, who someone wrote in the comments, mentioned in the comments in his book that I actually like called Intellectuals and Race, he himself defines race as a social construct based on biological characteristics, which is also a term that people get wrong. Social construct. It doesn't mean there's no biology, like in terms of gender specifically. Like you don't really see anyone going around saying gender is a social construct, and by that they mean that women can have penises and men can have vaginas, and there is no biological difference between men and women.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the last point, there's a metaphor that I find really helpful from a philosophy professor, who's also a trans woman, Sophie Grace Chappelle, who compares the way we use gender terms, man, woman, gender, whatever, right? All of those terms, to the way that we use terms like mother, father, parent, right? So there's a clear sense in which we use terms like parent or mother or father in a biological sense. We all know what that sense is. If somebody says, hey Andy, good news, the test came back and you're not the father, you know exactly what that means. That's a biological sense of fatherhood. But if you were raised by a stepfather and you refer to him as your father, everybody also knows what you mean. That's a non-biological sense of fatherhood. And in most contexts, the two overlap. So we don't really have to differentiate which one we mean. But every once in a while, step parents, adoptive parents, they don't overlap. They come apart. And then we do have to specify, what we mean. And so Sophie Grace Chappelle's point, as I understand it, is that there's, we can, is there, a way, one internally consistent way of using terms like, man, woman, gender, boy, girl, that refers to biological categories? Yeah, of course there is. There's, there are, if nothing else, right, there are people whose bodies, produce sperm, and there are people whose bodies produce eggs, that much, we all know how to use the terms that way. But also, there I think is a different sense that has to do with how people experience the world, how they identify, how they present, and
Sophie Grace Chappelle, like Dave Chappelle's last special.
Different spelling and
different Chappelle.
Different Chappelle. I actually wrote something about Dave Chappelle's special where I made a stupid little joke about that, because I brought up Sophie Grace Chappelle and I said, but different spelling and no relation. She's a white British woman, but in any case,
right.
Yeah, I'd actually be fascinated to know the answer to that question, but I do not know it. She probably has better things to do than criticize comedy specials. But in any case, I think that the same way, sure, we understand one internally consistent way of using, the terms like mother and father that are important and appropriate to use in certain contexts. But like if we ran into somebody who was like, look, when I have parent-teacher conferences at this school where I'm the principal, I don't want any adoptive parents or step parents here because parent is a biological term. God damn it, I am not going to allow, these woke, whatever,
woke step parents,
to come in and redefine biological terms. We'd think that they were an extremely strange and unpleasant bigot, and I think that you can apply the same thing here. And even though, look, I mean, sex actually does have more to do with biology than race does. I mean, race, is roughly speaking, I know there are, exceptions in different societies, different points, but roughly speaking, every human society has had, at least the two, standard genders, but within the last couple hundred years, the boundaries of what's considered to be a white person have gone all over the place, historically, and it's still used in bizarre ways, right? Somebody, yeah.
Italian, the first Italians and Jewish and Irish people to immigrate to America. Thaddeus Russell writes about this in his book called The Renegade History of the United States. Yeah, that's a great book. How they used to be literally referred to by the N-word. They were.
Yeah, right. And which is crazy, but it's also okay, what's the better, that seems crazy to us now, but it's not because we have some sort of much better thought out or more consistent way of using any of these terms. That there are plenty of Italians whose skin tone is not noticeably different from plenty of people we consider to be light-skinned Black people. That's there's no even in terms of skin tone, why skin tone of all things, right, should be what's what we use to split human beings into these big categories, which we think are important for some reason, rather than eye color or whatever, right? You obviously do have clusters of features, but I mean this doesn't, as a biological concept, it's nonsense. Okay, so we don't mean it biologically, we mean it as something like some sort of social construct. Okay, fair enough, but I think that even there, I think there's a lot of terminological slippage that's not helpful. Because I think a lot of times when people say race and they don't mean the biological thing, what they really mean is racism, right? They say this thing happened because of race. What they really mean is this thing happened because of racial prejudices in somebody's head, or that. I mean, the sort of most obvious example is some victim of police violence who died because of his race. Well, no, I mean, whatever you think race is, it certainly doesn't, that's certainly not what caused him to die, right? The cop caused him to die, and because of ideas about race that he had, right? But I don't quite know what we mean. We call that race. And this might seem really nitpicky, but I think that one reason it's important to track is a lot of times, even a couple minutes ago, right? You were sort of talking about race and class, and these all seem to be sort of concepts of the same type. But I guess they seem to be pretty different kinds of concepts in some important ways, because it's what it means for somebody to be a member of a certain race is ultimately that they either consider themselves to be or are considered by others to be a member of that. I mean, it's ultimately, an identity category, the same way that if we're not using gender as a synonym for sex, the same way that gender is an identity category, or we can list off all these other identity categories. Whereas class is not really one of those. That, in other words, like you could be, if you and your boss are both like devotees of Ayn Rand, and it's very important to both of you that there are no such thing as classes, and you're just two free men, entering into a market relationship with each other. It will remain objectively true that you have different economic interests and different relationships to this economic structure. That's like if you, and like somebody who's like an adjunct professor, who could maybe like scrape together $20,000 a year, and more importantly, from a Marxist perspective, draws a paycheck but doesn't own the place, is it might be very important to them that they think of themselves as a middle class professional, but that doesn't really but like, no, you're a skilled worker maybe, although part of the problem there is that your skills aren't very scarce, so they don't actually command that much on the academic labor market, which is why you're an adjunct. But you're a kind of skilled worker maybe, but no matter how, the university will screw you over just as much, no matter how important it is to you that you think of yourself as a middle class professional rather than a worker. And so in that case, it might make a lot of sense to encourage people to instead of respecting their identity, right, to encourage them to think of themselves in a different way and think of themselves as a worker and organize a union, get a contract. And so that all seems pretty different to me. And I guess just to cut the long story short on the critical race theory issue, I think that I think racism, is a word that means at least three different things. I actually did a debate about this last year with a right-wing YouTube guy, calls himself Mr. Reagan. I assume that is not his name, but I don't know his actual name.
I think I might have seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that debate, I talked about like, okay, here are three things that the debate was about: is racism still a major social problem in the United States? And I said yes, right. And I think and I sort of differentiated three different things you could mean by it, which are just racial prejudice. I think that's probably what most people mean by racism most of the time. The second is what is sometimes thought of as like the P+P definition, prejudice plus power, which is that racial prejudice combined maybe with positions of power. That so it has like larger social impacts, besides just like you being an asshole to other people in your life because of your prejudices. And then the third one, which I actually think is the most important one, that people, and I'm not even sure this is the best way to think about it, but this is what people are talking about when they use the phrase. Like when people talk about structural racism or systemic racism, they either mean P+P, or else what they mean are racial disparities that where black and brown people are clustered on the the short end of the stick for something. And of course, that debate was spent arguing that yes, all three of those things exist and are important. But I think that when you kind of recognize, that sure, the first certainly exists, right? You can, my good friend Jason Miles is a co-host of a podcast called This Is Revolution, and he also is he's a black man, and he's a member of a metal band that that's gone on tour. And he'll tell me like, yeah, there are certain places like getting to West Virginia or whatever, where it's like, doesn't matter how tired people we are, like we're not going to spend the night there because it's not going to go well, right? So like, yeah, like the prejudice in people's heads, that definitely does still exist and is still a problem. And I think the combination of prejudice and structural power also exists and is a problem. I think that certainly if you think about police shootings, like if you're making split-second decisions about whether to pull the trigger, any kind of conscious or unconscious bias that's in your head might come into play there. But then the thing is, I don't think that either of those are the primary issue. I think the primary issue is the disparity issue. And I think that's a lot of what critical race theorists are often getting at, right? Like to the extent they're not just talking about Q plus P, I think what they're really getting at is when they say things like, oh, racism or white supremacy, doesn't necessarily have to involve prejudice. It's that you're perpetuating racist institutions. And you say, okay, well, what makes the institutions that you're perpetuating, what makes them racist? And I think the answer is that they have these sort of disproportionate bad effects, on non-white people. And okay, I agree that the phenomenon exists for sure, right? I mean, I think that everybody's familiar with all the usual statistics about policing and imprisonment. That's often what people focus on when they think about this stuff. But of course, we could also talk about healthcare or education or any number of things like this, which, by the way, every single poll where, politicians who are trying to talk about race, right, almost exclusively talk about the first couple things, the police and imprisonment and all that. But every single actual poll where you ask people what their highest priority issues are, Black Americans consistently, majorities consistently say in the polls, jobs, healthcare, stuff like that, right? Because that's everybody's highest priority if you don't have those things. But also Black people are disproportionately likely not to have them. But then I think the other question is, and this is really what people like Adolph Reed or Walter Ben Michaels are raising, is what would count as achieving justice? And the problem with a lot of even progressive discourse about race, and I think some of this does bleed into the critical race theory discussion, because I think a lot of critical race theory implicitly makes the assumption the implied vision of justice is getting rid of disparities, that you no longer have disparities such that there are good things like having health insurance or having a college degree that white people are more likely to have, proportionally, right, than Black people, and there are bad things like being shot by the cops or going to prison or dying of a treatable disease that Black people are more likely to have than white people. That getting rid of that would count as justice. But I think the point that somebody like Adolph Reed would really push here is, hold up. So really, because really what we're talking about is poverty, because the disparity in poverty is the root of all those other disparities, the primary root. Some of it's about prejudice by decision makers, but the main thing is that due to the legacy of Jim Crow and redlining and all of that stuff, Black people are more likely statistically to live in poverty than white people, and all of those other things go with it. All of those other disparities sort of piggyback on that. But then somebody like Adolph Reed would say, okay, so would a just society be one where we had exactly the right proportions of every racial group living in poverty, being subject to this kind of aggressive militarized policing that exists in poor neighborhoods, not having health care, not being able to go to college, et cetera, that we had exactly the right number, that it was exactly 10% of the people living in poverty, were Black, and exactly, whatever, every percentage was right. That doesn't sound very appealing. And that doesn't sound like a very exciting vision of a just society. And I think certainly what sounds less exciting maybe is what I think in practice a lot of this stuff often comes down to, which is a focus not even on the bottom end, but on diversifying the top end. That if you
like that commercial about that Latino woman who joined the CIA, or pink bomber jets or shit like that, right?
The woke CIA commercial. She said she was a cisgender millennial with generalized anxiety disorder. It's like, Jesus, this is the creepiest thing I've ever seen, that like the CIA has learned all this stuff. Yeah, right. But the thing is, like, you could say, oh, they're they're faking it, they're appropriating it, whatever. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think a lot of this discourse is not actually incompatible with having the status quo in many ways. That like you could have. And also she. I think there was a line in the commercial where she spoke Spanish, which would, by the way, be a very useful skill if you want to be in the CIA. Like go into.
Probably.
I mean, if you're engaged in trying to, overthrow leftist governments in Latin America, support death squads, like the, like Spanish language skills would be very relevant there. But the point is, like, I don't know. I mean, I always think of, of something actually at that Jordan Peterson conference, like Michael Brooks telling me, it's like, look, when it gets down to it, right? Goldman Sachs doesn't actually care if you're trans or, what you are, right? Like that's, they can make just as much money with the most diverse, sort of upper level staff that you could possibly imagine, right? Like, as long as they're making money, they are good with that, right? And it might even strengthen the institution because they're not going to like pass over people who are like more qualified for arbitrary reasons, and you'll really get the best person for the job, in charge of. I always think of there's an old Matt Taibbi article in Rolling Stone where it talks about Goldman Sachs as this vast octopus, like going around the world with its money tentacle, thrusted into anything that, that smells like profit, that's like, it's like, yeah, you can have that, Hispanic millennial with generalized anxiety disorder, as long as she's good at operating the money tentacle, right? They don't care. And notice too that what that focus on diversifying the top does is that it leaves behind the overwhelming majority of people in all of these groups, because, like sociologically, it's still true that what people always correctly say about genetics, that there's more variation, within races than between them, George Floyd's experience of life was more like the experience of somebody in similar levels of desperation, that he'd been laid off, that what he was actually being apprehended by the cops for, was trying to like pass a bad 20 to like get a couple things at the store. That like his experience of life is much more like a white person in the same circumstances than it is like that it is like Oprah's experience of life, right? Just to like there's no, those things are really different from each other. And I think oftentimes this kind of discourse about race really unhelpfully obscures that. And then, if what we really care about, which I think what we should most care about is the condition of people at the bottom of society, where, again, this concern with diversifying the top really is going to do very little good to anybody in there, right? Like they talk about, people will talk about like, oh, it'd be so cool if Hillary Clinton became president, and then every little girl would know that she could become president. It's like, okay, but most of them will, right? Like,
yeah.
Most of them will not become president. In fact, almost none of them will become president, just like almost none little boys will grow up to be president. But they, let's say a little girl who doesn't grow up to be president, instead she grows up to be a single mother who can't leave the job where she's being sexually harassed because she's worried about losing her health insurance. Like, Hillary Clinton being elected doesn't do her any good. If the board of directors of Walmart, is like exactly half male and half female, or I don't know, it's 2021, we'll make a few of them non-binary, and there are exactly the right proportions of of members of each racial and ethnic group, on the board of directors, it's not actually going to do anything for most members of those groups. To do anything for most members of the groups, what you need is to do something about poverty, and that, of course, poverty is something that disproportionately affects, members of minority groups, because, this was an apartheid country until the mid '60s. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, like there are literally laws, on the books, in big parts of the country, say, that excluding Black people from all kinds of things. So of course, given that history, you're going to have more people who are in poverty, or not necessarily more, but disproportionately, people in poverty who belong to those groups. But I mean, I always kind of think of it like a cheesy metaphor, but I mean, like if there's some serial killer who's got a bunch of people trapped in his basement, and let's say that like he has some intense prejudice against Albanians, so if he can find somebody who's Albanian, he'll definitely kidnap them and put them in his torture basement. And so like 3/4 of the people in the basement are Albanians, and 1/4 a mixture of other things because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay, not everybody got to the basement the same way, but everybody has the same problem, right? Everybody needs to get out of the basement, and they're more likely to get out of the basement if they work together. And that roughly what I said would be the Marxist criticism of critical race theory, which is a discussion that somebody like James Lindsay, who I don't know what he'd make of it, right? Because he seems to think that critical race theory literally is Marxism, and that both of them are also the same thing as, I don't even know, like the
postmodernism.
Yeah,
and the CDC, and like Joe Biden and the Democrats and the Sovietization of America.
Yeah. like William Frederick Hegel and Joe Biden and Joseph Stalin and Kimberly Crenshaw and the blue-haired college kids, and possibly I actually saw him tweet something the other day that, taken literally, suggests that he thinks that street gangs in Chicago are also somehow linked to this. I'm really unclear about but literally, like, he shared this article about this girl, very tragically shot in a drive-by shooting, and the person who's quote tweeted says, "This is so senseless. What do the people who shot her think they're accomplishing?" And he quote tweeted it and said, "Well, they think well, their goal is capital R, revolution, so they think this is justified." It's like, wait, I totally lost track of who the they is supposed to be in this sentence.
Wow, that does like, what the hell made him think that those people are like for radical political revolution, like they're Marxists or something? That I don't get it.
No, exactly. Like I don't know, man. I think I am pretty certain that I am pretty certain that like every single person who's committing drive-by shootings in Chicago right now, I don't know. Maybe there's like one mentally ill person who's just doing that in a totally random way. But like, if I had to put money down, I would say that is a member of a gang who was probably trying to kill somebody else, and probably the reason they were trying to kill whoever they were trying to kill had something to do with with like disputes with rival gangs, with selling drugs, with who's like stuff like this, right? Like it's
kind of like capitalist fights. Like they're selling a product. They're capitalists. They're making money from their product, and they're killing each other over the competition.
Exactly. Like a gangster is selling drugs is like the least communist thing in the world. I mean, like that's that they're an entrepreneur. They and again, much like much like Goldman Sachs, on an infinitely smaller scale. Like I think that that people in position, people in drug gangs in Chicago, I don't think they give a shit about politics. I think
No.
they care about making money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is it's all it's so annoying too, because a lot of people just criticize, get really mad when you criticize people like James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson, and they're really attached to their views, but like almost none of them who get mad about it have even actually read any of these books either. They're like, well, their explanations sound really feasible and sophisticated. Yeah, but you can build really sophisticated explanations for things if you are a smart person, because that means you're better at rationalizing your preconceptions about things. You can build these sophisticated strawmans. That's what they are.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, like QAnon seems pretty convoluted, and I'm sure. I am sure that there is. I'm sure that there is somebody who's really into Q who's like really, really good at coming up, with complicated explanations that, if you accept some insane premises, sound internally coherent and plausible, of why all this is going on and what exactly the conspiracy is with the, cannibal pedophile Satanists and, and all of that, right? Like, and also like, okay, look, if we're going to, I mean, sure. I mean, you could have smart people who see the world in any number of strange ways and construct theories based on that, and draw connections between people based on that. But it's like, I don't know. I mean, like a lot of like if you're going to just start agreeing with people based on that, man, you might have to come over to my team. Like there are a lot of I mean there have been a lot of there have been a lot of very smart people who, in some cases, believed insane things, about like Stalin's Russia or whatever, who are radical leftists, like I don't know why, like you just haven't run across their book, like what's so special, what's so special about this, that's like James Lindsay or Jordan Peterson. Like, I guess the most generous thing you could say that I've heard is that, well, if you like philosophy, which I clearly do, at least they're, at least they get people, interested in it. But that always reminds me of, I don't know if you remember this, this, 9 years ago, and, it feels like much longer ago than that. But do you remember Cody 2012?
I don't think so.
You know what that is? Okay. All right.
No.
So Cody 2012 was this weird viral campaign to try to raise awareness about this African warlord Coney, who was the head of something called the Lord's Resistance Army, which was committing various atrocities and sort of. I'm not
Is
exactly.
That in Liberia?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Liberia. And
I heard about just the thing in Liberia with the cannibal warlords. I heard about that part of it.
Yeah. Anyway, I have but this is. I'm not exactly sure what the goal was, or if there was a really well articulated goal of exactly what they wanted to have happen here, but it was this incredibly popular thing. There was this Cody 2012 video that everybody was sharing on social media and all of that, and I remember it driving me crazy at the time because there's somebody who should have known better, right? This is like a not to indulge too much in in meritocratic ideas that I disagree with anyway, but this is somebody who went to college for many years. It's very strange to hear from him. I remember I pointed out after he shared this video, hey, look at the stuff debunking some of this. This is actually not that the particular guy they're talking about wasn't a very bad guy. He was, but a lot of the things in the video weren't exactly accurate, and and et cetera, right? So I was pointing all this out, and he said, "Oh, but it spreads awareness." I was like, "What does that mean, though?" Right? I don't understand. Awareness of what? I would think that you could only be aware seems like a success term. You could be aware of something. Being aware of something sort of suggests that it's true. So I guess Jordan Peterson and James Lindsay, who Lindsay in particular confuses me because there are people who I have a lot of respect for who have who have had or even continue to have a more positive view of him than I do, right? You mentioned
me too.
You mentioned Thaddeus Russell, and who I deeply disagree with about many things, but I like that, I respect that. I think he's an interesting guy, and he has interesting things to say. He's somebody, for example, who definitely must see something in James Lindsay that I don't, right? Is much more positive view of him than I do. But
did you see Thaddeus's last episode with James Lindsay? That one was unbearable to me.
I watched parts of it. Yeah. So I didn't I don't get it. Especially, I will say that I think at the beginning of that episode, James was giving Thad the sort of most toned down version of the kind of thing that he spews on Twitter all day, every day. That he said, because they were going through that Sovietization of America tweet. He was like, well, this means that there's the Soviet Union, there's a political class that's unaccountable and this, that. It's okay, but wait a second, right? Sure. Yes, but this is new. In the I don't know. More is the political class in the United States in 2021 more unaccountable was when Richard Nixon was president? I'm not sure about that, right? That seems like maybe, maybe if anything, maybe if anything, it was actually less then, but whatever, right? Even putting that, that nitpick aside, I don't know. I feel like he was giving Thaddeus the least crazy presentation of his views, at least at the beginning of the episode, and it's not, it's just a weird thing. I don't. Sometimes he talks like it's just a metaphor. I think it's a dumb metaphor if it is a metaphor, but sometimes he talks that way. But I don't know. He tweets about 200 things a day that make it sound like he's deadly serious about this.
Yeah. I was surprised in that episode when he was talking about how his mindset has changed and that he's more positive about it. But then, every time I see him tweet something or every time I see one of his videos, he sounds really super worried about all the woke, postmodern, neo-Marxist, critical race theory stuff. And yeah, I'm a fan of Thaddeus Russell too. I think he's kind of gotten maybe a little crackpotty about some of the COVID stuff, but I think he has a lot of really interesting people that he talks to. Even when I disagree with them, they usually have really interesting conversations. But
I think
sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's right. I think that he. I think that he. Even though he's not exactly libertarian, would object to being called that, but he does tend to swim in those waters a lot, and I think that I think a lot of people in that world, have views about COVID that I would view as pretty crackpotty. and in general, right? Like, I mean, I don't know. The list of subjects. I mean, as much as I like the guy, the list of subjects that I actually agree with him about is probably pretty short, right? For one thing, so we could talk about all the contemporary politics stuff and some of the conspiracy theories. We could also talk about, bigger scale stuff about socialism and all that. But we could also talk about like really basic philosophical things. For one thing, unlike me, Thaddeus Russell actually is a postmodernist, and he and credit where credit's due. Like when I was on Unregistered, we were talking about this then. From the opposite perspective, he very much agrees that postmodern Marxism association is unfair.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and that's one of the things that surprised me about Thaddeus Russell's last episode with him, because I kind of assumed that he was going to argue with him about some of the associations that James Lindsay has been making between postmodernism and critical race theory and critical theory and stuff, because Thaddeus Russell is so favorable to postmodernism, which is one of the things that I like about him. But I was surprised that it kind of seemed like he was buying into that stuff because he's been so like anti-COVID vaccines and masks and stuff like that lately. So yeah, that was like disappointing, I guess I should say.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't have, that I don't get that excited about, just because, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like not so much on this issue. I mean, obviously, I really disagree, strongly, about all of the things you just listed off, actually. But I feel like in a much larger sense, I kind of get where he's coming from, and I think that and I don't know. I mean, I guess I just don't get. I guess I just don't get that mad about it, because it's like also like James Lindsay, I actually might get madder about, because he's actually he's actually part of an effort to change laws, and I think he's like actually like testified, in various government committees and stuff, to try to explain why, you should have like bans on teaching critical race theory, which, by the way,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my take on that is that even though we spent like 20 minutes earlier talking about all the the sort of like Marxist criticisms of critical race theory, I agree with. Okay, one, no, for the most part, it's not. You can do the thing that they do, where you find one person in like a teacher training document or something using the phrase critical race theory like once in 300 pages, and assume that, that's literally being taught to high school students. Maybe you can find like some stuff that's done in the name of anti-racist pedagogy or whatever, some of which maybe I would find cringy too, that is sort of rhymes with critical race theory or has some common DNA or whatever. But like, no, for the most part, critical race theory is not being taught in high schools. But the other thing, this is the other half of my take on this, even though I actually disagree with critical race theory, if it was, I wouldn't mind. Like that'd be fine.
And also like one criticism of this that one of my friends pointed out that I think is really salient is that he's like James Lindsay is a big fan of the Enlightenment and freedom of speech and all that kind of stuff, and yet he voted for Trump for a hypocritical reason. I don't have a problem with people voting for Trump, even though I wouldn't vote for him myself, but he voted for him for a hypocritical reason, to ban speech. So
yeah, I mean he's right. I mean I think that if you actually look at the record of of the Trump administration and some of the things that it was doing, and I think if you actually care about free speech, then you should be concerned about like National Guardsmen shooting rubber bullets at protesters. and the DHS, going to Portland to guard statues, and like do some very creepy intimidation tactics, while they were there, pulling people into unmarked cars and stuff. Those actually seem pretty important, but also like the anti-CRT stuff seems super authoritarian to me because, it's sort of in the name of kind of ideological conformity, micromanaging, classrooms by like state bureaucrats, who aren't trained in that. And also, again, no, for the most part, it's not being taught in high schools. But if it were, look, I think I think a good.
What happened to countering bad ideas with good ideas?
Yeah, exactly. Like I think a good teacher doesn't tell people what to think. They present them with ideas and help and discuss them, and students can come to whatever conclusions they want to. And so if it's being taught well, I have no objection whatsoever to these ideas being in the mix of things that students learn about. Even if it isn't taught well, even if it's taught in a sort of dogmatic, indoctrinated way, man, I don't know, it still wouldn't make the top 10 list of things taught in dogmatic, indoctrinated ways in K-12 schools that I most disagreed with. Let's talk about what's taught in government and economics classes, and then also like. Actually, I also even sort of disagree with the usual line where people will say, "Oh, well, of course, none of this critical race theory stuff is going to be taught in high school because that's for critical race theory is for law schools. It'd be much too advanced for them." It's like, yeah, some of it maybe, but like, I don't know. I mean, like you could have like Derek Bell wrote all these like short stories to like illustrate, different ideas he had about critical race theory. You could like the Space Traders is one of them. Like you could totally have that. As a reading in like in a high school English class. I'm not saying it's great literature; it's definitely not. But but like whatever. That sounds like a way more interesting day of discussion than probably most things that happen at most high schools most of the time. I mean, like this is kind of my bigger take on a lot of this stuff. Like people getting really excited either for or against about like Gavin Newsom signing off on. Ethnic studies is a requirement for high school graduation in California. It's like, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't think this is going to have any big positive or negative impacts, honestly. Like, I think that I'm very skeptical that most people remember almost anything they learned in almost any high school class. Like that's, like unless you happen to have a great teacher who really got through to you or something like, probably, most people, for better or worse, usually worse, aren't learning much, so
I didn't start being interested in learning until after I graduated from high school, because I got the idea in my head throughout school because school was boring that learning is boring. But then as an adult, I developed an interest in learning, and I've learned way more since high school than I ever did during my school years.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, look, I would say actually, bring it back to Gavin Newsom, like a few days after he was getting, denounced by the James Lindsays of the world for the ethnic studies thing and being getting like slow claps from liberals about it. Like literally within days of that, he vetoed a big expansion of Cal Grant, which is California's big financial aid tool that would have let about 110,000 more students, about 150,000 more students overall, about 110,000 in community colleges, have their education paid for. And it's like, okay, first of all, even if we do think that, healing disparities is the way we should think about justice, this would actually at least help to do this, right? Because there's disproportionately non-white people who can't afford college, who do some stopping from doing that. But secondly, I'm a big fan of community colleges for many reasons, not least that I went to one because I didn't give a shit about school when I was in high school. I mean, I was in the I had I skipped class all the time. I barely graduated, but then I went to Lansing Community College in my hometown in Michigan, and lo and behold, discovered in college that I actually did enjoy school as it turned out, right? Like if I could take classes I found interesting, I actually did enjoy it, and then got whatever. I've got a PhD now, like not that that's what I think everybody or even most people would necessarily enjoy doing, but like I think that I'm a big fan of second chances in general. And I think that delivers one of the many goods that community colleges deliver is doing that for a lot of people. But I actually will say because we were talking earlier about a lot of Thaddeus's views that we both find hard to understand and just empirically wrong in some cases, but I will say that like I actually remember several months ago I was listening to an episode of Unregistered where he was interviewing Cedric Johnson, and in that episode he said something that struck me enough that I actually texted Thad about it. Like while I was in the I was like kind of making dinner and listening to that episode, which is that he was asking Cedric about his experience, his formative experiences early in life and everything. He said, "Oh, were you a good student in high school?" And he said, "No. I only started, caring about school when I got to college." And Thaddeus said, "Yeah, same for me, and same for like most guests on the show." And so I actually texted him to say like, "This is hilarious because that's exactly my experience." But it's not something we talked about, when I was on the show. But I think it does get down to part of what I like about him, despite thinking that he's wrong about nearly everything, which is that he just seems like an interesting guy. He's not trying to wield political power to do things that are going to harm people, which I do think James Lindsay does, or Chris Rufo, certainly, Jordan Peterson, C16. He's not trying to wield political power in ways that, in ways that are going to hurt everybody. I mean, basically, he just strikes me as somebody who likes to read books and get high and talk about ideas. And,
sounds like me.
I enjoy all those things, like I'm pretty, like I'm pretty happy to like hang out and do that. And like, it's like, all right, I think he's wrong about a bunch of stuff. We can talk that out, like that's not, that's not something that like excites a lot of anger in me, whereas if you're, if you are, actually having bad effects in the material world, that I care, I care way more about that.
Yeah, I agree. The Thaddeus has some really interesting conversations with people, even people he disagrees with, and like you said, I think he's not like, but I think he's not spreading, in my opinion, he's not spreading misinformation and like demonizing things that don't deserve to be demonized anywhere near to the extent that someone like James Lindsay or Jordan Peterson are.
Yeah, right. I mean, he actually like, which is actually one thing that I respect about him, because even though like, a lot of his criticisms of Marxism and socialism are things that obviously I disagree with, and in some cases I find sort of incomprehensible, right? Like I just fundamentally don't get it, like they or they seem whatever, like that they, even so, at least when he does it, I'm always confident that he knows what he's criticizing, like he actually, even if his reasons for disagreeing don't really make sense to me, and we can spend all day arguing about it. Like I understand what the target is, and I know that he understands what the target is, and that and that he's read a bunch of Marx, and he knows what Marx says, and so he's going to criticize Marx. He's criticizing a thing that actually exists. Whereas the Jordan Peterson, James Lindsay stuff just seems to me like criticizing this sort of blob where like all of the things that you don't like, you know, you've kind of jammed together into this like big collective enemy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this giant, like you said, this giant blob of a whole bunch of evil things that are trying to destroy society.
Yeah, right, exactly. You know, and I mean, I guess another thing, you know, so we're probably wrapping up the next few minutes anyway. Like another thing I would just say is like, I don't, you know, when people, I think one of the things that I most fundamentally don't get about the worldview of somebody like Lindsay, you know, Peterson in a way is actually a little bit different because I think that like Peterson at his core has sort of worked out ideas in a sense about, you know, like there is actually like an economic view there, which is that, you know, hierarchies are inevitable and they largely come from you know, whether people are taking responsibility for their lives and cleaning their room and standing up straight, you know, with their shoulders back, or possibly whether they're really talented. And, you know, you shouldn't try to fight that. Instead, you should just try to like, you know, you should just focus on, you know, personally getting ahead, you know, like you know, Michael Brooks would do this thing when he would make fun of Jordan Peterson, where he'd do the, you know, Kermit the Frog voice, and he'd say, you know, that, you know, he'd like start ranting about like, you know, snakes and ancient artwork and mysticism and peyote, and like somehow the actual punchline is, so that's why you should, you know, come to work 15 minutes early, you know, like that. It's like, it is all ultimately, you know, about, like climbing this kind of meritocratic ladder. So like, I obviously could not disagree more, but at least I get it. But like somebody like Lindsay, I think beyond the fact that he's just like wrong about, you know, Marxism, critical race theory, Biden, CDC. He's probably even wrong about the blue-haired college kids. I don't know. You know, they have a like even though he's wrong about all of that stuff, I think that the more fundamental thing I don't get is that, like, for him the all-consuming issue is culture and how you know, like whether the culture has changed in some way that he, you know, that he doesn't like, or that he thinks, you know, reflects the influence of pernicious ideas, or, you know, something, right? Like something like that. And that's the sort of big thing, right? Like I think he is to his core a culture warrior, which is like why when he had that thing, those tweets, you know, that in that unregistered episode you're talking about that they're going over at the beginning, that like about the Sovietization of America. Like, and I'd, you know, we'd had that whole exchange because I was like, man, I do not know what you're talking about. Here on Earth A, not only are we not Sovietized, like we're not even going to get healthcare. Like we've got a, you know, we've got like a, you know, like this thoroughly centrist Democrat as president right now, and even he is unable to do a lot of what he wants because of, you know, because like the opposition of conservative Democrats, you know, within his party, and the fact that we have a 6-3 Republican majority on the Supreme Court, you know, and like I don't understand how you could describe this situation as like, oh, basically we're becoming communist, you know, like this is, it's like I mean, this body that has the ability to veto and rewrite laws, like, is 2/3 Republicans. Like that doesn't seem like a situation, you know, very prone to communism to me. And his reaction to that, right? Like in, you know, I mean, it's on Twitter and in that episode was like, oh, you're focusing on minutia. I'm talking about these like big things going on with the culture, whatever. And it's like I think that's the biggest disconnect because I don't.
Yeah.
I
think it's kind of the other way around.
Yeah, I think it's very much the other way around. Like I think that that whether I think that whether you can organize a union, without getting fired, so you can have some kind of like limited say at work, and whether you're paid enough money that you can live on it, and whether you can and whether let's say if you want to start a band or finally write that novel, whether you could do it or whether you think no, I can't take I can't have I can't take that year off to do that because then I won't have health insurance, my family won't have health insurance. Like those things all seem really important to me, whereas I don't know exactly what's being taught in some high school English class nobody's going to remember in 5 years, that whether they're using the phrase anti-racism too many times or, there's some dubious academic theory that's influenced somehow. That seems just spectacularly unimportant to me. It's in the, in the late 2000s when, the new atheism era, all these people who were convinced that the most important thing in the world, was what people believed about metaphysics.
Oh yeah,
right?
Religion bad, Islam bad.
Yeah, and it's I don't really think, whatever. I'm a huge philosophy nerd, so I'm more than happy to argue about that stuff. I enjoy, I enjoy a good argument about esoteric, philosophy stuff. So somebody invites me tomorrow to go have a debate with them about the cloud cosmological argument or whatever. I'll accept that invitation. That sounds like a fun night to me. But I don't think that actually matters very much. In a political sense, I think this idea that that it's really urgently important, to hash this out. It's no, it's interesting. It's philosophy is a valuable human activity, but it's not. I don't really, if I would rather, let's put it this way. There's a song. Actually, let me look this up because I'm going to forget who sings this. Yeah, there we go. Tim Minchin has this song that's this.
Oh, the comedian who plays the piano.
Yeah, that's the dude. Yeah, he has he has this song that he sings called "White Wine in the Sun," which I actually kind of like. It's actually it's in a strange way. It's sort of I sort of enjoy it, but he's got this line in there where we're talking about singing about being an atheist, and he says I'd rather spend have dinner with Richard Dawkins than Desmond Tutu, and every time I've heard that, I just thought that's the line that I always get stuck with. It's really, what's wrong with you? That's not why.
Richard Dawkins sounds like he would be a really kind of grumpy guy to be around.
No, exactly. And he's not. Whatever. I guess he's a good biologist, and when he just popularized biology, he's been good at that. But
yeah.
But he doesn't. He's not a particularly good writer. He's not particularly rigorous thinker, and he also just seems most of his cultural commentary just seems kind of weird and crankish. And it's I don't know. I'd totally have the dinner with Desmond Tutu instead, right? I disagree, I guess, with Cornel West about what happens to us after we die, but given the choice between would I rather see myself as part of a camp with Cornel West or Sam Harris, who I guess thinks all the things that I think about that. I'm going to go with Cornel West. I think that
Me too.
I think that I care vastly more about what somebody's, I care vastly more about how somebody wants to change the actual world that we all want to live in, rather than whether they're like whether it's such a low priority thing, that's like they have like, they think that they have this view about the metaphysical nature of reality that's wrong. Okay, that's the kind of thing I find interesting. Happy to talk about it. But like, I'm not gonna like what I don't get though is like getting mad that they have this view. That's just not interesting to me. And I think it's just as religious as like fundamentalist religious people. That's like one thing that I gradually found out myself, because I used to be a militant atheist like Sam Harris, and then I gradually learned from people like Jonathan Haidt, for example, about how, they're evolutionarily speaking, religion can serve some purposes for binding people together and stuff. And like, it's not really like you were saying, if you have a disagreement about what happens to you after you die, does it really matter for any part of your entire life? I don't really think so. Yeah, I mean, I think that just like intellectual curiosity, you're trying to figure out what's true. I get that, right? Like,
me too.
I obviously feel the pull of that too. And again, I'm happy to have those conversations, right? Like, I enjoy arguing about philosophy, but I don't. I mean, it's like it's the same thing as the like, oh my God, what if some microscopic traces of critical race theory get on our high school curriculum? Like I don't. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think parts of critical race theory are incorrect, and I would argue against that. But like, also, I guess I care a lot more about what the class sizes are, and how much the teachers are getting paid, and whether there's so much violence in the neighborhood that the kids have to go through a metal detector to get to school. Like all of those things are much more important to me than whether than like whether they're reading something in class that reflects some ideological assumption that's ultimately wrong. I mean, there's obviously a place where the rubber meets the road and you're actually arguing about politics, but like also I just don't. I don't know. I mean, I guess I just don't actually believe that that most people are as easily brainwashed as the Lindsays of the world seem to think they are. Like I think that I mean, in good ways and bad ways, right? Like I don't know. I mean, like try to like teach a college class, like see how many people do the reading, right? Like I'm not worried that everybody's going to be indoctrinated into every detail, of what their teacher thinks, and that's just not my priority. Like I want it's the same. I care less about whether people zone out during an ethnic studies class after their history and geometry classes they zoned out during. Like I care less about that than about whether they can like afford to go to college, like when they do finally graduate from high school.
Yeah, that seems like a lot more important for sure. Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I know you said you wanted to end it soon there.
It is getting a little late where I am. I think you're in Mountain Time, right? So it's still a little earlier for you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking with me, man. This was really fun and interesting. And I'd love to talk with you again if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I was thinking I would love to do I was thinking of two ideas actually. I would love to do like some philosophy deep dives. Like I've been trying to learn about Kant lately, and I've been having some trouble. Like I tried reading his Critique of Pure Reason, and I honestly had more trouble understanding it than like Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaus. So it would be interesting to get into some of Kant's main ideas. Or I was also thinking, since your most recent book is called Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, I think it would be fun to talk about cancel culture too, because there are two recent things that happen to do with that. And I know you did a podcast on your channel about Dave Chappelle's newest special. So it'd be fun to talk about that. And then also this stuff that came out about R. Kelly, where people want to cancel his music because he was a pedophile. So I think that would be interesting to talk about too.
Which Dave Chappelle did try to warn us about way back in like 2004.
Yeah, that's true, right?
No, I am more than happy to come back, talk a little Immanuel Kant and Dave Chappelle. So let's do that.
Awesome. All right. Thanks a lot, man. So yeah, I'll just say the stuff I like to say at the end of my podcast here, and then you can say anything else you want to before we end it there. So yeah, thanks again to everyone for watching. Please like, subscribe, click the bell to be notified and come out with more videos. I'm actually going to talk with my friend who is doesn't like socialism tomorrow, and we're going to have kind of a debate / conversation about socialism because, like I said, I think it has some merit, so that'll be interesting. And then also on the weekend, for something completely different, I'm gonna be doing another movie chat on either Blade, or we're gonna be starting to do like probably 3 different podcasts about that show Squid Game that recently came out and is super popular. Yeah, so check out those if you want to, and also check out my Patreon that I have in the link for the description of this video, which I always greatly appreciate. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And read investigate the evil boogeyman ideas like critical race theory and postmodernism and Marxism and all those kind of things. They're not as scary as you might think they are. So anything else you want to plug or anything there? I know there's your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, YouTube channel is called Give Them an Argument, and lots of good stuff coming up there. We do finally get to play the Charlie Kirk debate on Monday, and then we've so have many good things coming up after that. Let me just remind myself here. Yeah, so we're gonna have Larry Sharp's gonna be back on the show the week after that to argue with me about libertarianism. Anna Kasparian's gonna be on the week after that, talking about her debate with Ben Shapiro. And the week after that, we've got Slavoj Zizek is going to be back.
Awesome!
So that should be a lot of fun. So check all that out, and I guess I will just quickly plug the new book, which is available for pre-order, which is actually takes us back to the conversation about the limits of new atheism, because the new book is called Christopher Hitchens: What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've seen you talk about him before. Yeah, that should be interesting. Yeah, check out his channel. Your channel is called Ben Burgis, and the podcast is called Give Them an Argument, right?
Well, I mean, just it's I mean, I guess the channel. I mean, if you just search either of those things, it'll come up right away. So, I mean, I don't think anybody actually types in URLs on YouTube. So just
of course,
in the search function, either of those things should get you where you want to go.
All right. Yeah, check that out for sure. It's really interesting. And yeah, so thanks everyone for watching in, and thanks for talking with me again, Ben, and love to talk again in the future. And
for sure.
Adios, everyone. Until next time.